Now, if I asked you why this 5,000-year-old long barrow sits right here in this exact spot in the landscape, you'd probably assume exactly the same as me. Just have a look behind us. Well, there aren't too many places in southern Britain with a view like that. So I guess for a final resting place for me, well, this definitely works, but
I spent some time looking into the curiosities of this area, somewhat of a rabbit hole and a half, and I found something really curious that we should be able to find just a few metres away in the hedge.
I've got a very specific GPS to find this stone. We'll leave the long barrow in peace. We'll come back later because it plays a very important part in today's story. Now, somewhere in this hedge is a large sarsen stone according to the old maps and the new maps and various sources online. That sarsen stone is going to help me explain, when I do find it, exactly why that long barrow is situated just there across the valley rather than the obvious reason we think. Now, to do that, you're going to have to give me 10 minutes to explain exactly what I'm waffling on about, and for that we're going to need to head down to the coast. Okay, so I didn't quite make the coast, but you get the idea. Just down there is Weymouth and, more importantly, Malcolm Regis. Now, that's an infamous port where the plague was first said to enter Britain in the 1300s.
But for us, today is that port context we are after. The Romans used this to their advantage and very much enjoyed the natural protection it gave movements in and out. And with that, we can probably assume a history of this harbour, this trading place back thousands of years prior to the Romans, for similar reasons.
So if we head inland as a trader, perhaps trying to give ourselves the best and the safest route from the changing landscape, from maybe the wet and the forested areas below, well, then you find yourself on this ridge, the ridge that I'm travelling across today.
2400 BC, and we start to see an influx of a new culture arrive in Britain, the Beaker people, named so for their specific style of pottery, which they were often buried with.
So these people brought about change in Britain with the use of metals working gold and copper, and while their use of metal workings would eventually be pivotal in the change of eras and what we now know as the Bronze Age. And of course, to get bronze, well, we need tin, and that is in that direction.
Around 1500 years before that era, this landscape once again saw change. We start to see the land cleared for settling, agriculture, and whilst areas like this would have been part of that change from tree coverage, perhaps a lower land, the marsh and the damp, might not have seen changes as quick, so this route across the ridge would offer safety.
So as I head along this ridge from just down there in Weymouth or Malcolm Regis, within a mile or two I'm met with a lot of these. These are round barrows. These marked the transition almost immediately from 2400 BC, that told us how they deal with their dead. And this is a particularly spectacular one, but there's one of scores along this ridge. In fact, Dorset's reputed to have over 2,000 of these Bronze Age barrows.
The Bronze Age people loved to bury their dead with things that were clearly important to them: arrowheads, flints, pottery, and in some cases their precious metals. The 1800s did help us identify much of this from archaeology and that perspective, but also note that many of these were dug into, robbed out for personal collection.
Okay, so let's get back on track. We've got the coast in the distance and we've got the first part of this ridge that I've just walked along there. That's maybe 3 or 4 miles long, and of course we're now 200 metres or so above sea level. We've got a really good view to the south, we've got a great view inland to the north. So once again, the prominence of the landscape sticks in mind for those burial mounds all across that ridge there. It certainly does for me. I wonder if it does for you too. What of that stone I mentioned at the start of the video? Well, we will get there soon, but as we head west, first of all, we've got a change of era and something quite obscure.
If we continue our journey along this ridge, we take a slight detour because the map tells us we should expect to see the Hellstone chamber, and Google Maps even suggests it's a dolmen.
So a dolmen, well, we don't get many of those in Britain, so I'm really keen to see what this one looks like. We don't exactly know what they're for. They're said to be a chambered tomb, so that would imply burial. But with the evidence we have, there's a distinct lack of human remains. In fact, Vicky Cummings has proposed something completely different.
Installations of effect, magical and extraordinary construction, and strategically positioned to induce both drama and awe in their encounter.
So this structure has quite a few sarsen stones around it. It's very tall, and oddly, if you look at the earthworks outside, well, it looks like it has a tail going through the dry stone wall there. Perhaps we're not looking at a dolmen at all, perhaps we're looking at more like a long barrow.
A quick delve online, and indeed I think we're looking at a restored front of a long barrow. 1866, and a group of 8 men restored this, but my gut feeling is they didn't do a great job.
So what this is for doesn't really matter. It's what it is in the landscape and where it is in the landscape that matters for us today. Proximity to this ridgeway that goes across just there in the background, and spectacular views all around us. Now, if you think this is obscure, you should see what's just another half a mile away to the west. So as promised, we're just half a mile or so on, probably even less, from that long barrow, and we start to move away from that long barrow, the Neolithic era, and we start to see these. This is a stone circle. Again, we're on this long ridge and we start to see these round shapes back almost to the Bronze Age, where we started on the beginning of that ridge. Similar sort of era, late Neolithic, early Bronze Age, we believe.
So the story here goes a little like this. Early 1960s, agricultural activity disturbed the stones, so an excavation was the order of the day. Great news.
So here's where things got a bit interesting. You see, when they moved these stones ready for the excavation, the archaeology, they found that there were 28 of those stones, and yet there were only 8 or 9 actual holes that were originally there. That caused all kinds of confusion. We have maybe 20 stones too many. Now, some have suggested that this was actually a Bronze Age barrow and they sort of put more stones on top and around to butt it up. Some have even suggested that this was part of an avenue of stones and they'd just been moved here by a farmer. All got rather confusing.
I'm wondering about something else. I'm thinking about the stone that we didn't see in the hedge at the start, but we should have seen. I'll come to that very shortly.
So up here on this ridgeway with this gorgeous view, well, that stone circle is one of the very few in this country to actually be excavated in a pretty sensible way, even though back in the 60s. But frustratingly for us now and back then in the 60s for those archaeologists, well, it gave us very little dating evidence. We learned very little from it. In fact, we don't even know if it was actually a stone circle in its own right. But I guess none of that really matters for the point of today's journey along this ridge with this gorgeous view.
At this point we have 2 options for heading west on ridges. The current marked South Dorset Ridgeway heads along the coast, but for the purposes of our point today and the one I'm trying to highlight, we really need to head along the north-west ridge from here.
So the first thing we see when we head slightly inland away from the South Dorset Ridgeway along this ridgeway is a huge sarsen stone, but it looks like a very similar composition and style to the ones in the stone circle just half a mile back across the ridge there. And of course it does look very similar to the one in the hedge just further on where we started the video back at the long barrow. Perhaps now we're seeing some kind of route marked along here, a processional way, or just a way to mark the route themselves.
So back here at Greymares and her colts, we're looking at a very well preserved chambered long barrow, and I'm starting to think about the importance of this ridgeway. The ridgeway that probably saw one of the most important changes in history, in the history of Britain, the movement of metals and the movement of knowledge.
So if we head round the side of this long barrow, well, you can see a few dips, a few holes. It probably doesn't go back as far as what it once did. It's understandably the early antiquarians, the early 1800s, were doing their archaeology, not in the sense that we would know it today, But they did find human remains, and they did find pottery which gave it their date of around 300 BC, which fits in very nicely with everything we understand about long barrows. So if I'm saying to you that this wasn't here for the view, the position in the landscape, well, what am I trying to say? Why am I pointing out the moot stone, the stone over there that we saw back on the actual pathway of this ridgeway? I guess we need to come to some kind of conclusion here. So my last stop of today is this Knighton Stone Circle, and it's beautiful. All these obviously would have been standing. I'm in what is like a small henge now, just on the outside, circling it. No archaeology to date has been done on this site. It's 25 meters or thereabouts in diameter, and all of these sarcens probably came from the valley just down below, Valley of the Stones. And that's about all we really know about that site, but that doesn't really matter for today's point. You see, when you're here in the landscape and you're viewing all of these individual sites spanning thousands of years and eras and histories and generations, you can't help but think they're all here because of the absolutely stunning view all around us.
But then consider the others that we know of, the Stonehenge and the Avebury being the most famous. Some of them are almost hidden from view. They are sometimes considered, especially Avebury, to memorialise a place and memorialise a lineage. Avebury grew up around a house, a dwelling, and grew up over generation after generation and evolved over hundreds and thousands of years. Nothing to do really with the position in the landscape.
And here we have that monumental tradition, trade route and a sustained lifeline into the country, a routeway that would go years and eras beyond our comprehension, a routeway that would sustain you and your family, it would keep you warm, it would give you life and soul, and it would put that into this very landscape. It would memorialise that notion of the route, and perhaps all of these along this route did just that. I quite like that idea.